Everyone has a friend that's so smart, it's just not fair. Who is that person in your life? You know who I'm talking about. The friend that never studies for tests and yet somehow manages to ace every single one. Those same tests that you absolutely bomb. You know that one that you thought you were prepared for, you spent all night studying for it, show up to class gung-ho, ready to go, and then you open up the test and realize, I studied for the wrong thing. Or maybe you know that friend that actually likes school. They enjoy studying. They spend a good amount of time doing it. But what you don't get is how in the middle of all of that studying, they somehow manage to squeeze in all those extracurricular activities like those private fencing lessons. Maybe they captain their varsity sports team or they hold an ASB position. Whatever it is, how is it that they manage a seemingly unmanageable schedule? Maybe you are that smart person. You know, my senior year, I was called out of class for a meeting. I thought I was in trouble, thought I had finally gotten caught for taking those chips in the ASB office that I didn't pay for. Just as a side note, guys, stealing is bad. So I walk into the office, open up the door, and immediately my fears are relieved. All around me stand the smartest kids in my class. Yes, I am not in trouble. So we're staying there. I'm trying to figure out, like, why am I here? I'm not the smartest person in the world. I'm not the dumbest either. Anyways, in walks in the school counselor, and she says, guys, I just want to let you know we gathered you all here this afternoon to tell you that you're actually all in the running to be class valedictorian. You're all in the 1% of your class. I literally bust out laughing. Now, I was friends with everyone at school, was friends with that counselor, and so everyone totally understood that that was just kind of my personality, but I felt out of place. I didn't feel smart enough. But we're not talking about just being smart tonight. I'm not here to give you some self-help tips about how you can better prepare for those tests or exams, how you can write an awesome essay. That's not why we're here. You know, we're starting a 6-week series in the book of James. And the first chapter of James starts with wisdom. You see, we all know smart people, but how many wise people do we know? The world is literally full of millions of intellectually sound people, smart folks that know their stuff, that got straight A's. But how many wise people are in the world? I guarantee you that they're considerably far less. You see, our IQ and how smart we are, it can be something that we're just predisposed to at birth. But when it comes to wisdom, it's not something that you can just obtain or get or work hard for. You see, those people that are smart, even though they may not seem to care, when they were kids, they probably did care. They probably did work hard for it. They probably did have a strong desire to learn. That's how smart people work. But wisdom, as I said, isn't something you work for. It's not something you just get. Wisdom comes with time and experience. Wisdom is a gift. So, let's open up our Bibles to James chapter 1. If you've got one of the Bibles that are in our little youth room, you're on page 847. I'll give you guys a few seconds, find it, and then we'll start in verse 2. So like I said, we're in James chapter 1, verse 2, and it says this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." So as I said earlier, wisdom comes with time and experience. Wisdom is a gift. But here's the backbone of the foundation for the rest of the night. This is where we really get started. Hear me out when I say this. Wisdom comes, or should I say wisdom is, right perspective. Wisdom is right perspective. What's perspective? Perspective is the way that we see, view, or understand things. And so James is writing to these Christians saying, this is the perspective that you can have. This is the perspective that you need. When you go through difficult or tough times, you can have joy because you know the outcome. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen in your life in particular to what is exactly happening, but you know that the difficult times can produce a strengthening, a perseverance, and endurance of your faith. The difficult times grow your faith. Now, I don't know about you, but it's pretty counterintuitive to me to think about joy in the middle of a tough time. That's not how we work. That's not how we're wired. We don't jump up and down or become elated at the sound of bad, hard news. And so people can say, like, I don't have any regrets in life. I know that the tough times teach me great life lessons, but James isn't talking about just some particular life lesson. James is talking about life as a whole, your relationship with Christ. Do you know that the difficult times are an opportunity for you to have your faith strengthened in your God? So what are the things that are getting in the way? James is talking about holding on to our faith in Jesus even though things are tough. What might be causing you to want to give up or let go or stop pushing through, stop hanging on? You know, maybe you've got friends at school that make fun of you because of your faith. Maybe it's the stress from your parents' financial securities or a divorce, and that's just pushing its way onto your life. Maybe you're failing some of your classes at school, or you actually just hate being there. Maybe you don't have close friends that call you on the weekend and are asking you to hang out. Maybe it's the death of a loved one. Maybe it's a breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend. Whatever it is, all these tough, real life issues can get in the way if we let them. If we don't have the perspective that these things are a chance for us to grow. But I love the letter of James because it has a fascinating backstory. Now, the name James is a pretty common name. It would have been a name of a number of people in the New Testament, but traditional biblical scholarship attributes the authorship of this letter to James, particularly to James, the brother of Jesus. Now, in Galatians chapter 1, verse 19, Paul lists off a James who is the brother of the Lord. In the book of Acts, throughout it, there's a man named James who's the brother of Jesus, and he is one of the early leaders of the Jerusalem church. But James, the brother of Jesus, wasn't always on his brother's side. At least, we're not sure that he was. You see, throughout the Gospels in different places, there are mentions of Jesus' family, his brothers and sisters. Like we see them listed in Mark chapter 6, verse 3. We see them listed in Matthew chapter 13. But in Mark chapter 3, verse 20, earlier on in Jesus' ministry, he's at this place and his family is there. And they say he's out of his mind. He was misunderstood. It's very possible that James, the same one who writes this letter, thought his brother was cray-cray, nuts, that something wasn't right up top. So what happens in between that time and this letter? What is it that transformed Jesus' brother from an unbeliever who thought he was crazy to a wholehearted, dedicated follower? The cross changes everything. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead is what propelled James, a skeptical brother of Jesus, into a new, transformed life. Why would James write about a brother who just died? Why would he commit himself to a new direction, a new path, if his brother never rose from the dead? I think about the disciples. It sounds like a grand lie, but why would they make that up? Why, after spending 3 years with him thinking that Jesus was actually going to establish an earthly kingdom, would, after he died, decide, you know what, it's okay that he died and frustrated us and disappointed us and didn't do what we expected him to do or what he told us he would do, why don't we just make up some story about him rising from the dead and start telling the whole world about it? I find that really, really hard to believe. It makes a lot more sense to me to have faith and trust that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead, as foolish as it may sound. See, the world, culture, social media, everything, our society is attempting to tell us that what we believe in, our faith, is absolutely dumb. That it's senseless, that there's no logic or reasoning behind it, that it's a fairy tale, a myth. But I have a hard time thinking that a brother of a dead guy would have his whole life completely changed and transformed. So just like James, the brother of Jesus experiences a transformed and new and changed life, just as he receives a new perspective when Jesus dies on the cross and rises from the dead, you and I can have that too. That's the wisdom that James is writing to his readers and listeners about. The wisdom to know that we have an eternal perspective, an eternal hope, that it's not just about the difficult things that we face now. It's about trusting and knowing that what Jesus has done on the cross saves us from ourselves, saves us from sin, saves us from the burden of trying to fix all things on our own. That's the wisdom. Jesus is our wisdom. Jesus is our right perspective. You know, as a personal trainer for years out in Yorba Linda before we moved here to Temecula, I worked at a gym part-time and worked at a church part-time. And I learned a lot about people when I worked in both places. It's really obvious to tell when someone hasn't been to the gym before or hasn't been in a long time. But I'm not just talking about the way they look, I'm talking about the way they act. You know, maybe they walk in and they hop on a machine the wrong way. Or maybe they stand off in the corner and you can tell they're awkwardly doing like mini circles, trying to figure out what other people are doing so they can try out something as well. You know, maybe they walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes and then after their warm-up, they go out to the weights and then they get intimidated by some really big muscular guy, and so they just end up leaving. You know, when it comes to the imagery there, it's pretty easy to see that, you know, beginners can come to the gym for a few weeks. They can step in, they can even show up over and over, but at some point, if they don't push through the initial grind, if they don't learn what they're supposed to do, if they don't end up figuring it out, they're going to stop. And not just stop, but they won't reap the results of hard work and dedication. They don't have the perspective to see that training in difficulty yields awesome results. There's this intermediate to advanced training technique called time under tension. Time under tension refers to the duration of stress placed on a muscle through eccentric or concentric contractions or static isometric holds. I just use a bunch of fancy words that I haven't used in years that I felt like saying. Basically what I'm saying is this: the longer a muscle is used, the more muscle fiber recruitment, the greater chance for a muscle to experience induced hypertrophy or muscle growth. Now, would a beginner come to the gym and decide, I know exactly what I'm going to do today. Let's do some time under tension. Let me grab some dumbbells and see if I can curl them for 2 minutes. Or let me grab some dumbbells and see if I can squat with them for 1.5 minutes. Probably not. You're going to go in and look around, see some folks that are doing dumbbell curls 10 times and decide, I should do that too. Grab some dumbbells, 10 curls. Whether or not they're tired, whether or not it was heavy enough, whether it was light enough, it doesn't matter. They wouldn't have known. They wouldn't have had the perspective. They wouldn't have made that decision. But even though time under tension isn't a fun training technique, even though the pain that you endure when you're doing that same repeated movement and your muscles are contracting and uncontracting for, let's say, that minute or 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes is absolutely brutal, if you go in with the right perspective, if you know that it has a greater chance of your muscles experiencing growth, if you know that your muscles will be strengthened, If you know that you're going to gain endurance, then it's worth it. If you know that's the case, then you'll push through. So let's start reading again. Get back in your Bibles. James chapter 1 again. Now we're starting in verse 5. Says this: If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Those who doubt should not think they will receive anything from the Lord. They are double-minded and unstable in all they do. When it comes to wisdom, we have to ask. Only God can give us the perspective that what Jesus did on the cross, his death, burial, and resurrection doesn't just change things for eternity, but changes things right now, both eternity and temporarily. That life with Jesus is so worth it and so fulfilling. And when we talk about prayer and asking God, sometimes we think like, what in my life can God fix? What's wrong that God can just change? But what if we started asking God to change us, to change our perspective, to give us this wisdom? What if you, as teenagers, intently started asking God to give you wisdom? James says, don't doubt that. It's not like you're asking God for a Ferrari or even asking God to just fix your grades. You're asking God for a perspective that is timeless, so that no matter what you're going through, you realize that the time under tension, the duration of pain or difficulty is worth it because of everything that Jesus has already done. I can say it over and over again, but until it gets from our head down into our hearts, we haven't experienced this new and fulfilling life. James says, don't doubt it. He's not saying that doubts are evil. He's saying you can't doubt that if you ask God for something that God wants you to have, that you'll get it. You have to trust that you'll receive that perspective. So what's the tension in your life right now? What's the thing that's deserving of the perspective that what Jesus has done makes it so that we can push through that time under tension? And if you're not going through a difficult time right now, what if you started praying for that perspective so that when things do get tough, you already know this can make my faith in Jesus stronger? Will you allow that tension, that pain, that difficulty to break you, to cause you to give up or let go or not push through? Or will we continue as a people with the wisdom that we only get from God? Trust and know that whatever we go through in life, that time under tension ultimately yields a faith that's strong, that perseveres, endures, and is so worthwhile.